The National Desk, America's News Now.
Tensions rising over the Israel-Hamas war, how division within the Democratic Party could impact the race to the White House. Plus,
it actually disincentivizes work.
Guaranteed income, controversial taxpayer-funded programs popping up nationwide. Critics wary of how the projects are structured. And later, laying down the law, the unique steps some states are now taking as smash and grabs become the norm. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this weekend edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. Setting the stage for November, new concerns about how AI could impact this year's elections. IVF access restored, the Alabama law protecting providers from liability, and the legal questions still left unanswered. Gauging inflation, what the Fed chair said this week about cutting rates and the country's chance of recession. But first, we begin with new details on the Israel-Hamas war and the violence spilling over into the Red Sea. At least 3 crew members aboard a commercial ship off the coast of Yemen were killed by a Houthi missile this week. The group claims the vessel ignored warnings from Yemen's Navy. There have been dozens of Houthi attacks in the area since the Hamas attack in Israel spurred fighting in Gaza. The U.S. and coalition forces have been able to intercept previous attacks, but the State Department says it expected one to hit eventually.
I think that it was sadly inevitable. The Houthis have continued to launch these reckless attacks with no regard for the well-being of innocent civilians who are transiting through the Red Sea, and now they have unfortunately and tragically killed innocent civilians.
U.S. and U.K. have carried out 4 rounds of strikes against the Houthis, but the group has still managed to fortify its weapons stockpile, vowing not to stop its attacks until Israel stops fighting the Palestinians. The president grappling with growing pressure from both parties to establish a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. The National Desk's Atra El-Nashar details growing protests that could cost him his 2nd term.
He's been a legendary voice in Democratic politics for decades. Now, James Carville has another blunt message for President Biden. In a Daily Mail op-ed, Carville says tensions in the Democratic Party over the Israel-Hamas war could spark a repeat of the chaos seen at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago. Hundreds were injured during the unrest, coincidentally, where Democrats will hold their convention this summer. Back then, the tension stemmed from then-President Johnson's decisions in the Vietnam War. Carville writes, "I'm not predicting that Chicago streets will again erupt into violence, but if tensions in the Democratic Party continue to build over the ongoing Israel-Gaza war, the discontented are going to seek an outlet, and their numbers may be overwhelming."
That's all right. That's all right.
The president, cabinet officials, even the first lady already encounter protesters on a regular basis.
Free Palestine!
The death toll in Gaza surpassing 30,000, according to the local health ministry under the Hamas-run government, which the UN says historically provides accurate data. Lately, there are signs the Biden administration's patience with Israel is wearing thin.
Given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire.
Just 2 days later, on Super Tuesday, more than 250,000 voters in the Democratic presidential primary voted either uncommitted or no preference, a likely protest vote following an effort in Michigan that turned out more than 100,000 uncommitted votes. Carville writes, "Now there's no question that the GOP faces even stiffer headwinds than Democrats in 2024, he says, because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But regardless, it would be incredible folly for Democrats to dismiss the size of their political problem." On Capitol Hill, I'm Atra El-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
A new study found top AI photo generators can be used to produce misleading election-related images. Researchers tested tools like ChatGPT+ and Microsoft Image Creator and found the tech created misleading images of U.S. presidential candidates and voting security. The generators do have some content protections, but experts say they don't go far enough, adding that almost anyone can use them to spread misinformation. Providers of in vitro fertilization, or IVF, can now resume embryo transfers in Alabama. This after Governor KYUU signed a law Wednesday protecting them from legal liability.
The patients were contacted last night by their physicians. We understand that they burst into tears with the joy that they get to receive the care that they need today.
As we've reported, this law was rushed after the state Supreme Court ruled frozen embryos are considered children. That meant doctors could be charged with manslaughter for discarding them. It's important to note the legislation did not address the legal status of embryos created in IVF labs. Checking in on your money, the Federal Reserve is in no rush to cut interest rates. That's according to Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who testified on Capitol Hill this week. The sentiment means more pain for Americans who have faced almost 2 years of elevated borrowing costs on everything from car loans to mortgages. Powell says the economy has slowed down, but still has a ways to go to reach the Fed's 2% inflation goal.
There's no reason to think that the U.S. economy is in some kind of short-term risk of falling into recession. Having said that, though, there's always a possibility, a meaningful possibility.
In January, overall inflation rose 0.3%, bringing the annual inflation rate to 2.4%. Right now, fewer people are quitting their jobs. Out of the total number of workers employed, 2.1% quit in January. That's the lowest reading since August 2020. Hiring activity and the number of open jobs are also continuing to ease after reaching record high levels during the pandemic recovery. Developing now, according to a DailyMail.com analysis, dozens of guaranteed income projects across the country have given away millions of taxpayer dollars to families below the poverty line with no restrictions on how to spend the money. Here's the National Desk, Kayla Gaskins.
Guaranteed income programs rolled out in cities like Atlanta, Baltimore, and Los Angeles appear to be gaining popularity. Tacoma, Washington, now preparing to kick off round 2 of their project, giving families $500 a month. While proponents argue these programs have real positive impacts, critics remain wary of the no strings attached structure.
It actually disincentivizes work, number one. But number two, it also acts as a form of pure redistribution.
This format allowed a D.C. mother, Kenethia Miller, to use $6,000 of the lump sum she received to take her 3 kids and their father to Miami for a 5-day vacation that included steak dinners and new clothes. She told the Washington Post the trip allowed her to expose her kids to luxury firsthand, adding, "They got to experience something I would never have been able to do if I didn't have that money."
I think what families really would like to see in D.C. is to use these resources, these taxpayer resources, to hire, you could hire 25 police officers with these checks. That would go a lot further in actually bettering the lives of D.C. residents.
The Daily Mail calculating American cities have spent about $125 million on these no-strings-attached guaranteed income projects. Looking at some of the biggest programs around the country, New York City has spent around $22 million on these programs. Oakland, California has spent about $7 million on the programs, and Los Angeles has spent a whopping $38 million. Data shows recipients spend about 2/3 on retail and food and only about 4% on leisure. As local governments try out different versions, there's a push for federal guaranteed income. Democrats overall are more supportive than Republicans. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins, reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Many of us have seen the videos of smash and grab robberies with multiple thieves working together to raid a store. I'm with Connor from the Fact Check team. It seems to have gotten so bad, Connor, that some state legislatures are actually passing laws to address this issue.
Yes, they are, Dee Dee. We actually spoke with a group that's called the National Conference of State Legislatures today, and they said that over the last couple of years, at least 15 states have created laws passing them targeting this issue specifically. And here's a couple examples I'll give you. So there's an Oregon law that went into effect this January. It increases the presumptive prison sentence for organized retail theft from just 10 to 11 months all the way up to 24 months. And then this summer, the Virginia legislature passed a law that makes it a Class 3 felony for anyone conspiring to steal goods worth $5,000 or more with intent to sell. That can carry a prison sentence of up to 20 years.
And then there's a lot of proposed laws out there as well. Tell us about a few of those.
Yeah, so let's take a look at Florida and New York. Starting with Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has announced new legislation that would make retail theft a first-degree felony in the state if it's committed with a weapon or if the thief has prior convictions. This could be punishable by up to 30 years in prison and or fines of up to $10,000. And then in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul recently announced legislation that would establish criminal penalties for online marketplaces and other third-party sellers of stolen goods and increase penalties for assaulting retail workers.
Day and night. This is happening in cities across the nation.
Yes.
Connor, thank you. For more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. Coming up next on the National Desk, migrants flying into the U.S. using an immigration app. New numbers painting a picture of the program kept under wraps. Plus, birth control pills going over the counter. The women's health issue that's getting mixed reactions. After dropping in January, the number of migrants crossing the U.S. southern border went back up last month. Border Patrol agents cataloged 140,000 migrant apprehensions for the month of February in between ports of entry. That's up from 124,000 in January. And this after Republicans in the Senate torpedoed a bipartisan border bill, something the Biden administration says is a necessary solution as they prepare for migration to spike this spring.
This system has been broken for decades, and we have a bipartisan solution that will deliver much-needed resources and much-needed changes to the broken system.
GOP lawmakers argue the president has all but ignored the border throughout his four-year term and that the border bill does not go far enough. They believe a Republican president can use already established laws to secure the border. The Center for Immigration Studies found that last year, at least 320,000 migrants flew into the U.S. using the controversial CBP-1 app. Joining Jan Jeffcoat to discuss is former acting head of Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan.
Now, this report is stunning. Hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants flown into 43 different airports, again, from January through December 2023. And Mark, to be clear, migrants have been flown to their final destination after arriving here in the U.S., especially at the border. These unaccompanied children, that's not a secret. And you said we've known about the CBP-1 app. However, Americans might be surprised to learn one of the uses of this new CBP-1 app was to fly migrants into the U.S. on commercial passenger flights. So we're talking about over Mexico, over the border. What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, look, I'm glad CIS once again, great reporting to confirm a lot of what we have already known, Jan, like you said. It's really unconscionable, but this is the shell game we've been talking about. This is what they've done, this administration. They've made a deal with migrants from all over the world that said, hey, if you refrain from illegally entering along our southern border in between the ports of entry, what we'll do is we'll let you fill out a couple of lines of paperwork online, and we'll actually let you fly in to 43 different airports in the United States where we'll process and release you this way. So it's absolutely to cover up bad political optics. It's try to reduce that optics from those illegally entering. And this is an absolutely abuse of their authority and parole. And keep in mind, this is why we've seen from 2020 to 2023, the average was about 240,000 come to our ports of entry in 2020. In 23, that was 1.1 million, Jan, coming to our airports. That's a 370% increase.
But are these migrants, they aren't coming to a point of entry. They're actually coming from their home countries, right?
Correct. They're coming from their home countries. They're able to get on a plane after filling out a couple of the lines on the CBP One app, fly themselves to a port of entry, an airport, basically anywhere in the United States. Right now, what this report said is they're flying into 43 airports. Right. That's information that we didn't have before.
We did not have that information before. And what I found interesting about this report is that the administration would not reveal also where these 320,000 migrants came from, nor would they disclose which U.S. airports they were flown to. In fact, in the lawsuit, it actually states this, that the locations were not disclosed due to fear bad actors would inflict harm on public safety or the information would create law enforcement vulnerabilities. What do you make of that? Why would we have a program that is so shrouded in secrecy with such concern of grave consequences?
Yeah, look, there's a lot that are coming up here. Now, we did know some of the countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti. We knew those were the 4 countries. But what this report identified through the FOIA request is they're actually using the CBP One app for countries well beyond that. And again, the 43 airports was something new. Part of the secrecy is because this is a shell game. They know they're unlawfully using parole. They're trying to hide that from the American people. They know that they're flying them into 43 different airports. They're trying to hide that from the American people as well. And as far as the vulnerabilities, that's the same thing at the southwest border in between the ports of entry, Jan. When we're invaded by millions of illegal aliens, that pulls resources away from law enforcement, national security mission to process these illegal aliens. That's the same thing happening at the airports. Those precious CBP officers are pulled away from their law enforcement, national security mission to process illegal aliens. So there's a whole list of reasons why they're trying to hide this from the American people.
I'm so glad we're showing video right now of airport security because it can take an hour just for a few hundred Americans to go through TSA security. So when you consider 320,000 migrants who were flown into the U.S. in just a year, how were our airports able to handle the influx? What was the process?
Yeah, so keep in mind, this is another reason why they were able to keep this secret, because you're talking about flights from outside of the country. So this is CBP owns that. TSA doesn't own that. And that's exactly how they were able to keep this from the American people when flights coming in from the United States. It's CBP that does all that initial processing. But again, just like for Border Patrol agents in between the ports of entry, when you flooded and you've increased that flow by 320,000, it's taken those officers off the front line away from their normal national security and law enforcement mission to process these illegal aliens. And Jan, another question I have is, what kind of documentation are they requiring of these illegal aliens? That's something else that we don't know.
And you can view the full interview plus more top stories online all the time at thenationaldesk.com. New details. The FDA has officially approved the first over-the-counter continuous glucose monitor for type 2 diabetes. Stella works with a smartphone app to monitor, record, and analyze blood sugar levels. The device is worn on the back of the upper arm and replaces the need for finger pricks. It will be available in drugstores this summer. For the first time in the U.S., women of all ages will be able to buy over-the-counter birth control pills starting this month. It's a win for reproductive activists, but others say it's going to do more harm than good. National correspondent Janae Bowens has a look at the controversy.
In the matter of weeks, women will be able to buy over-the-counter birth control pills. The news is getting a mixed reaction.
I feel a little caution about that. 12 years old, 14, something like that, would be able to just walk in and get it.
The controversial pill is called Opal. It works as a mini pill using only the hormone progestin. The manufacturer says if it's taken properly, it can be up to 98% effective at preventing pregnancy. You'll soon be able to buy it at pharmacies and online for around $20 for a 1-month supply. Dr. Jeffrey Singer with the Cato Institute says it's a win.
Women can get the mini pill over the counter without a prescription. That's just what I call a mini step in the right direction.
Emma Waters with the Heritage Foundation thinks women will try to use the birth control to self-medicate other issues. She says this one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work.
So we want to keep birth control with doctors, not as an over-the-counter available drug. And then second, we really just want to emphasize expanding women's health care so that they're receiving the in-depth diagnostic care that they need in order to make the best decisions for themselves.
Women's fertility is at the center of so many national conversations right now, from birth control to IVF, and the abortion pill mifepristone is set to be made available this month with a prescription at CVS and Walgreens pharmacies in some states. Now, the Supreme Court is expected to decide whether to restrict access to it by July. In Washington, I'm Janae Bowens for the National Desk.
Janae, thank you. And coming up next here, cutting down on cold cases, the new crime-solving unit targeting unsolved murders. Plus, preventing auto thefts, the steps some drivers are taking to protect their vehicles from being taken. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in Portland, Oregon, where a new cold case unit is aiming to solve hundreds of crimes.
We were at a point historically where we had science and techniques to bring to bear on old cases.
After 2 years, Brandon McGuire says, thanks to a $2.5 million federal grant, the department can once again dedicate detectives to cold cases. Along with the grant, the department also gets $300,000 for advanced testing, which includes forensic genetic genealogy.
To Baltimore, Maryland, where more drivers are getting security software upgrades or using wheel locks to combat auto theft following the social media trend. In fact, new data from Baltimore County Police reveals more than 655 auto thefts have occurred so far this year.
Our attempts of vehicle thefts are going up for those key Hyundais because folks have been getting the upgrades and they're not stealing those cars.
We're told Kias and Hyundais account for more than half of auto thefts in the area. In Texas, cattle numbers are as low as they were in 1950. John Robertson, owner of the Coleman Livestock Auction, says ranchers are getting better prices for their cattle, and in turn, they're selling much faster, impacting shoppers.
Well, the everyday consumer, I mean, it's going to get passed on to them, and they're going to see the high prices of that beef at the supermarket now.
With the fires in the Panhandle, Robertson says it's going to be several months before we really get some solid numbers on how it will impact the market. Still ahead, cinnamon recall expanded. The warning of lead-tainted products now expanding beyond applesauce pouches. Looking ahead, TSA is telling travelers to plan ahead for spring break vacations. TSA reports that travel volumes are trending at nearly 6% above the same time last year and are expected to increase. The busy peak for spring break travel begins this weekend and will continue through March 25th. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now, 3 hotels in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina are facing lawsuits after guests were bitten by bed bugs during their stays. According to the suites, the stays happened between October of 2023 and January of 2024. That's according to the suits. A Rochester, New York woman is facing felony charges after she allegedly stole $34,000 worth of perfume from beauty store Ulta. She was formally arrested and banned from the store, but returned to commit the crime. And a sailor from Maine has now become the first American woman to sail solo around the world. She launched from Rhode Island and just landed this week in Spain. The 30,000-mile journey took 130 days. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. New details. The FDA has expanded its investigation into tainted cinnamon products. Lead contamination now extends beyond the cinnamon applesauce pouches that were recalled in October. The FDA announced they have identified 6 distributors of ground cinnamon containing elevated levels of lead. The FDA sent letters to all U.S. cinnamon makers, processors, and distributors to remind them of obligations to prevent contamination. In honor of International Women's Day, Barbie is celebrating her 65th birthday with a new collection of dolls. Mattel is releasing universally iconic role model dolls based on women who inspire girls and use their platforms for good. The new role model dolls include Viola Davis, Helen Mirren, and Shania Twain. Each doll represents a country from around the world. Ahead in our next half hour, trouble for TikTok, the fast-tracked bill on Capitol Hill that could prohibit the app within the U.S. Plus, credit card late fee cap, the limit on what companies can charge under new regulations. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
We had fires to the west, fires to the east, fires to the south.
Charred land and destroyed homes, what may have ignited the largest fire in state history.
He did not purchase that gun with the knowledge that his son may use it against other people.
James Crumbly on trial for the murders his son committed, the steep sentence that matches his wife's. And the ultimate sacrifice, the top dangers for police officers on and off the job. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and right now a bipartisan group of lawmakers is fast-tracking a bill that could eventually prohibit TikTok in the U.S. It's one of the most popular apps out there, but leaders in Washington say it poses such a large national security risk that something has to change, and soon. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar has the details from Capitol Hill.
We're eager to talk to you.
It's a rare sight. Lawmakers from across the political spectrum standing side by side to fight against one of the most popular things in America, TikTok.
This is not a step that Republicans and Democrats are taking lightly.
TikTok is used by 56% of young adults, according to Pew Research. This week, the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party is out with a bill to block TikTok in the U.S. unless it cuts ties with its Beijing-based parent company ByteDance and any other entity controlled by the Chinese Communist Party.
This man is the editor-in-chief of ByteDance, and he is a CCP member.
Chinese law requires companies in the country to comply with the CCP. Top U.S. national security officials have spent years warning lawmakers that China can take TikTok user data and use it for surveillance or manipulate algorithms to steer public opinion, all in an effort to weaken the United States.
Those who have the best information have the power.
TikTok says this legislation will trample the First Amendment rights of 170 million Americans. A lot of everyday users aren't too happy.
No one gives a about data security anymore.
So you think TikTok users who love the app aren't totally concerned about their own data, should care about this for national security reasons?
Well, I mean, I think people think about data as this sort of esoteric blob, right? Like, oh, my data, I don't care, use my data. Well, wait a minute, how's that data being used?
Members of Congress know that getting rid of TikTok is a political landmine, especially in an election year. That's why they're being really careful to emphasize that this bill is written in a way to not put an outright ban on TikTok. Instead, it puts the onus on ByteDance to divest or spin off TikTok so that it could still have a future in the United States. It's just a question of whether voters will see it that way.
The app's popularity cannot be denied. Even the Biden campaign has embraced it, but the White House calls the bill a welcome step to address a threat to national security. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atrell Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
New AI job postings are growing within the U.S. despite sinking trust in AI technology. In January, there were over 10,000 new AI job postings, a 42% rise from a year earlier. 5 years ago, 50% of Americans said they trusted AI companies. Now, that number has dropped to 35%. And the low levels of trust are seen across political parties. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau finalized regulations this week that cap most credit card late charges at $8. According to the agency, this will save U.S. families more than $10 billion per year. For the more than 45 million people who are charged late fees every year, it works out to about $220 of yearly savings. The chief policy officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce says the new rule wrongly punishes people who pay their bills on time. The chamber also said it will soon file a lawsuit against the Protection Bureau. New details. In court this week, prosecutors claim the father of Michigan school shooter Ethan Crumbley could have prevented the tragedy and should be held responsible.
James Crumbley bought that gun that his son used to kill as a gift for his son 4 days before the attack. James Crumbley failed to secure that gun in a way to prevent his son from accessing it.
James Crumbley's son shot and killed 4 students at Oxford High School in 2021. Ethan's father faces 1 count of involuntary manslaughter for each student killed. His defense argues he didn't know his son knew where the gun was stored.
James Crumbley was not aware that his son had access to that firearm. You will hear testimony that access was not allowed.
Ethan's mother, Jennifer Crumbley, was found guilty of the same charges last month. Ethan, now 17 years old, is serving life in prison for murder and terrorism. Parents expressing their outrage following the city of Uvalde's investigation into the 2022 mass shooting at Robb Elementary School. The report finds there were many failures that day, but clears local police officers of wrongdoing.
Are these the people that you want responding to your loved ones? Guaranteed it's not.
And the report was presented at the Uvalde City Council meeting by retired Austin Police Detective Jesse Prado. The presentation suggested the officers largely followed policy, with Prado describing many of them as acting in good faith. Among the failures, he cites poor training for live shooter situations, lack of available equipment, and issues with communication.
When the officers initially made entry into the school, they made 28 attempts to use their radios to get information out to the rest of the officers that were showing up. And these were 28 attempts before they were shot at.
19 children and 2 teachers were killed in the shooting. Law enforcement took more than an hour to get inside the classroom and kill the gunman.
More than 130 law enforcement officers died in the line of duty last year. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. And can you break down what is the leading cause of death among officers?
Sure, Dee Dee, but first I want to point out that officer deaths are placed into one of 2 categories, accidental or felonious. The FBI has a database that tracks this, and so far this year, 9 officers were fatally wounded, while 9 were killed due to an accidental incident like a car crash. Now, in 2023, the leading cause of death, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, was firearms, but the other category represents the largest group of deaths, which includes things like medical events, COVID-19, and plane crashes.
And the numbers, of course, they vary by state.
That's exactly right, they do. New York had the most deaths last year, followed by Texas, Louisiana, and California, and only 10 states didn't see any deaths.
Also, an important issue in the U.S., how many people are killed by officers?
That's a really good question. According to data from Campaign Zero, police killed at least 1,300 people in 2023, which is the highest year on record since 2013. And there have been at least 150 deaths by officers so far this year.
All right, Courtney, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com.
Helping now, the National Transportation Safety Administration is introducing new self-screening technology at Harry Reid International in Las Vegas. The tech, which draws comparisons to self-checkout lanes at supermarkets, will officially launch on March 11th. The system greets passengers with a virtual agent and allows TSA to monitor X-ray machines remotely. It also reroutes bags that need additional screening automatically. Air travelers have another reason to pack lightly. Delta Airlines raising the cost of its checked bags. Flyers' first bag will cost $35 and any additional bags will be $45, which is a $5 hike. Last month, both United and American also boosted their baggage fees, which are a big source of profit. In 2022, U.S. carriers made $6.8 billion on the fees. The ongoing Smokehouse Creek fire in Texas has become the largest wildfire in state history, burning over 1 million acres. Xcel Energy says it appears that its power lines ignited the fire, but is rejecting any claims that the company acted negligently. Earlier this week, I spoke with a Texas attorney providing information to those impacted by the fires, now on the road to recovery.
Attorney Joel Pardo with Pardo and Homan Trial Lawyers joining us now. First of all, we want to thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
And Joel, let's start with this. What steps can our viewers affected by the fires, what steps can they take right now that will help them rebuild their lives once these fires have ceased?
Being born and raised in the Panhandle, I still have very strong connections with everybody in the affected area. And my law firm has been inundated with phone calls with confusion and concerns about exactly that. What can we be doing right now? And the first thing that I would say is be vigilant. Everyone needs to be on the lookout for insurance fraud scams, lawyer fraud scams. And the other thing is to realize that even your own insurance in a time like this, insurance companies will do whatever they can to minimize their insured's damages in order for them to have to pay out less. I wouldn't accept any money. I wouldn't sign any documents promising compensation immediately, and make sure that whoever you are interacting with, that you have done the background research to verify that they are who they say they are and that they are qualified to be giving you the advice and help that they are purporting to do. Another key step is call your local insurance agent. Make sure that you get a copy of your full insurance policy with all of your endorsements and attachments. That way, you can consult an attorney and you yourself can look over your insurance policy and make sure that you have an understanding of what type of damages will and will not be covered.
Before we let you go, Joelle, is there a place our viewers can go to find a clear and concise compilation of all the information, because we know this can be so overwhelming, all the information they need to know about seeking help recovering from their wildfire damages?
Absolutely. So we've put together a website called panhandlewildfires.com, and this website is essentially a resource all the members of the Panhandle can visit and find different pieces of information that will be applicable to their specific situation. That's panhandlewildfires.com.
Joe Pardo, we know that you are from the area, as you mentioned. We are thinking of you and everyone there right now. Thank you for joining us tonight on the National Desk.
My pleasure.
Developing now, this February was the hottest February on record, according to new data from the European Union's climate change agency, Copernicus. Scientists say Earth has obliterated global heat records for the 9th consecutive month. The last month that didn't set a record was May of 2023. So to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the state of the race to the White House to new policies tackling crime.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, reporting on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Our team of correspondents is here to share their insights on the stories they've been covering. Wrapping up a huge week in politics in Washington with a Biden-Trump rematch virtually set after Super Tuesday's results. Meanwhile, President Biden used Thursday's State of the Union to reset his messaging for the upcoming campaign, and national correspondent Christine Frizzau, the economy was a major focus.
Yeah, and it certainly is a major issue for so many Americans, and it's an uphill battle for Joe Biden to really turn the tide on this messaging. Let's remember, when he came into office, unemployment rate was above 6%. It's dropped way down. You've seen inflation go down. You've seen gas prices go down over the last year or so, and you've seen wages go up. And yet he cannot sort of change the messaging for voters. A recent CBS YouGov poll, voters were asked about who they trust more with the economy. They remember, 65% of those surveyed remember the economy as being good under Trump, and just 38% said it was good under President Biden. So these are sort of the realities that Joe Biden is going to be dealing with over the next several months as his campaign moves forward. This is going to be an issue he'll struggle with, and we do expect in the coming weeks to hear him continue to tout major pieces of legislation that passed while he has been president. We will have to see, though, if this starts to resonate with people who will be casting their ballots in November.
Meanwhile, the president also talked about crime. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, and there were some interesting developments this past week in some big cities that have seen a crime spike in recent years.
Yeah, Steve, looking at some of these new developments in these big cities that are, for the most part, very blue, and even in these states, very blue, passing some bills and laws and taking actions that look like something you might see in a much redder state. For example, D.C. just approved a new crime bill, and that gives police more power. It also creates longer jail time and sentences. They're redefining carjacking, for example, as a way to try to crack down on that type of crime. And it's not just D.C., New York as well. Governor Kathy Hochul, after a string of violent attacks on the New York subway system, Steve, sent in the National Guard. So you see the National Guard in their fatigues with their guns, monitoring the New York City subway, doing bag searches to try to create a sense of security there and get things under control. Heading across the country over to San Francisco, they also created or just voted on and passed another new crime bill this week. So, for example, over there, if you want to get welfare and you're in the state of San Francisco, you have to pass a drug test now This is a championship. This has been championed by Mayor London Breed, who's really trying to crack down on crime in those areas. And we see this trend, right, of these big bluer cities now really cracking down and trying to get a handle of the crime. And a lot of them still have crime levels that are higher than they were in the pre-pandemic era, Steve.
And on Capitol Hill this past week, a new push to ban TikTok. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar, tell us about that.
Yeah, Steve, it is remarkable not just to see conservatives and progressives standing side by side in total agreement on something, but the fact that they are doing it to take on one of the most popular things in America, TikTok, really shows you just how much of a national security threat Congress thinks this is. So on Tuesday this week, we saw the House Select Committee on China introduce this bill that would prohibit TikTok from being accessible in the United States unless its Beijing-based parent company ByteDance divests or spins TikTok off. The concern here is that the law in China is that companies that are there have to comply with the Chinese Communist Party and any operations. They have to hand over data. It's not like how private companies have a clear line when it comes to privacy and their rights with the government here. It's totally different. And the fear is that the CCP can take TikTok data through ByteDance, data on Americans, and use it to surveil them, to influence our elections, to influence opinions and sow discourse. So unless ByteDance were to spin it off, assuming this legislation passes, people wouldn't have TikTok in the United States. That's a very it's a political landmine in an election year. And we are seeing this legislation move at breakneck pace. It was introduced Tuesday. It was marked up and passed out of committee on Thursday. For viewers who aren't totally familiar with the sausage making process on Capitol Hill, that does not happen. It doesn't happen certainly in an election year, especially on such a politically volatile issue. Now, TikTok is not being quiet here. They are actually encouraging their users. If you pulled up TikTok later at the end of this week, you might have seen a pop-up that said, call your representative, tell them that you don't want a TikTok ban. And members who are behind this bill have been getting inundated with complaints from their constituents. However, they are very careful to say that this is not a ban. It's a new set of conditions that if ByteDance doesn't follow, then yeah, TikTok would be no more in the United States. I think it's fascinating, and it really, puts the onus on TikTok users to understand the national security implications and think, is it worth it?
All of these issues with a potentially significant impact on this fall's elections. You three are all over these issues. Thank you for your hard work. Atra, Kayla, Christine, back to you.
Still ahead, addicted America lawmakers in one state moving to combat the impacts of fentanyl as overdose deaths reach a record high. Plus, migrant landings, boats from Haiti showing up on the shores of Florida as gang violence takes over the country. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From Washington state residents pushing to stop fentanyl overdoses to an attempted casino robbery caught on camera in Indiana. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with migrants arrested after landing boats on Florida's coast.
This is video of the moments the Indian River County Sheriff's Office stopped a boat near Sebastian's Inlet last Friday. Inside, they discovered 24 undocumented Haitian migrants on board, including children.
Josh, we're going to be just off the L, just kind of.
By Saturday, a second migrant landing, this time at Coral Cove Park in Tequesta. According to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, 8 more migrants, including children, were discovered. 6 were taken into custody.
I'm confident that there are boats coming through all the time that we don't catch.
Nearly every migrant of these 2 incidents were from Haiti, a country in despair. Indian River County Sheriff Eric Flowers says he wouldn't be surprised if Florida's coast has an increase of migrants in the weeks to come.
The reality is the people that are leaving out of there are in such dire straits that they're so happy to get out of their country.
Birdseye kind of dove through the window and got into the cage, into the cashier's cage. One of the supervisors, when she first heard the screaming, she was getting on the phone trying to figure out what was going on.
James Johnson, an Indiana Gaming Commission investigator, describes in court what went down Saturday at 7:29 p.m. at the Hollywood Casino in Lawrenceburg.
And starts demanding money from the tellers who are dealing with the customers, the patrons at the casino.
Prosecutor Lynn Dedden says Birdseye was in debt. Documents from the Hamilton County Court show 2 civil lawsuits against him, one for a default on a personal loan for $30,000 and the other from Venmo for $5,700. Birdseye was at the casino as a customer.
He had been at the casino earlier in the day, had lost some money, wasn't doing well.
They say he had a fully loaded 9mm Ruger, 2 extra magazines, and a bullet was chambered in the handgun, ready to fire.
Despite the tens of thousands of people who sought help for drug use in King County last year, the number of fatal overdoses continues to climb, especially involving fentanyl.
I think it's a problem that has to be solved.
Delivering that treatment is part of an expanded approach county leaders are taking, led by Executive Dow Constantine.
While other communities may look at this and see an unsolvable crisis, King County is taking action.
A 16-bed residential treatment center is one part of that solution, slated to open later this year. That can help bolster the work of 22 walk-in clinics that connect addicts to short-term help. Mobile clinics will also go to where drug users are to deliver help, and more vending machines dispensing naloxone will put life-saving medications in more people's hands.
Still ahead, the stories making headlines next week, from a House hearing on mishandling of classified documents to new inflation numbers guiding the Fed's decisions. Looking ahead to stories making headlines next week. On Tuesday, House Republicans will hold a hearing with DOJ Special Counsel Robert Hur. The hearing will focus on the investigation into mishandled classified documents by President Biden, which concluded the criminal charges were not warranted. Also happening Tuesday, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics will release February's Consumer Price Index, which could signal to investors when the Fed could potentially cut rates. Next week, Scott Peterson is scheduled for a status hearing 20 years after he was convicted of murdering his wife and unborn son. The hearing comes after the Los Angeles Innocence Project decided to take up Peterson's case. And that'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings, and you can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.